You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, June 4th, 2026. It's 1:05 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought that I would talk about rewiring safety in real time. One of the things that we always talk about in terms of secure attachment is that a secure attachment or security really means that you feel safe. But also what it means is that when something happens and the attachment strategy activates, you feel compelled to run towards somebody who's not only safe, but will protect you. And one of the things that happens to us in growing up in family systems where that sense of safety, that sense of reliable protection isn't available to us, that sense of uh, danger produces a kind of endless anxiety state, which I think is one of the things that's very common to insecure and disorganized people is a constant anxiety. One of the things that also tends to happen in those family systems is that who we are and our spontaneous, authentic expression of who we are is interfered with because we don't get the reaction of protection and safety that we long for. And what that, of course, does is teaches us, and this is in a really hard, harsh way, that we have to quell our spontaneous, authentic response and tailor our responses toward the caregivers so that we can get from them a better reaction. And then depending on what your attachment conditioning is, this takes different kinds of appearances. Secure people really grow up in an environment where uh, it's always, as I prepared to say, 30% of the time, right, is how much your needs need to be met in order for you to develop a sense of predictable safety, how difficult it is in childhood experience to have uh, the capacity to predict less than 30% of the time that somebody will be responsive to you. That's part of what I mean by the harshness of that. Uh, you're just spontaneous, and the caregivers are interested actually in what you're expressing, and they're interested in understanding what you need, and they're in a state where they actually can cognitively understand that, emotionally connect, and then respond to you with the resources uh, to meet your needs. And when they don't have all of that in place, they can't really do it. I think that one of the main things that in recovering a sense of safety uh, in other people is to begin to see them as whole people. One of the ways that children respond to the chaos or the lack of attention that they get from caregivers is to split people apart into pieces, and we tend to focus on the pieces that we like, and we tend to ignore or distance ourselves from the pieces of the person that we don't like. But that, of course, is something that contributes widely to that ongoing, endless anxiety that we feel. It inhibits our capacity to express ourselves authentically. And the problem with not expressing yourself authentically, and this is, of course, not to an intimate, authentic expression, is not what I mean to everyone. This is another layer of this building safety, which is consent. One of the things that happens to us in family systems where our consent isn't valued, we don't learn the value of it. And so we don't value it in other people, particularly. In fact, the further down the attachment scale you go, the less experience you have with consent being of even a consideration, then that turns us around to not really considering consent in other people, but not even being sensitive to the expressions of consent. So we don't notice when we roll over people's boundaries until they're so rigid that they're impenetrable. And then we're surprised that we've gotten into a place of such rigidity, which is obviously the opposite of the spontaneous expression. So in secure people, the child, the infant, has the experience of simply expressing themselves, and that being enough to interest the caregivers and to get a response from the caregivers that's predictable in terms of meeting care. It's an interesting dialogue. Have you ever considered love? And what do you think of it as? Do you think of it as a state, an expression? Do you think of it as an emotional experience? Do you think of it as a set of behaviors? One of the things I think is interesting about the Western concept of love, particularly when we talk about romantic love, we tend to have this hierarchy, right? Romantic love is at the very top, right? We're all conditioned to want to be in this primary coupling. Right? Did you notice your conditioning around that? What do you think? Did you explore your own sexuality enough to know what your orientation is? And did you notice that part of that orientation is whether you're on the uh, polyamory side, or I like the new expression, monoamory side of things? Uh, did you, as a child, notice that Disney has 33,000 princess products that are available for children? Did you notice your gender instruction? Uh, and how brutal was that? Um, did you notice in the West now we define what it is to be masculine, and femininity is everything that's not masculine? And that as the taste and culture of what's masculine changes, that automatically changes the culture of what's feminine. It's alarming, isn't it? That one would be the negation of the other. And what do you do if you grow up in that negation, right? As opposed to the uh, um, striving for masculinity. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a hardcore advocate of what is the word I'm looking for? I suddenly got frightened to say it. Well, maybe it'll come back. Androgyny. So, and I think that in an ideal version of this, men have aspects, males, masculine has aspects that are also included in feminine, and feminine has aspects that are included in masculine, and that they don't need to be exclusive. Um, uh, but how do you sit with that? I'm looking at us, and we all seem to be fairly conventional in our adjustment to the horrible gender instruction that we receive as children. My mother raised me as a girl until I was 2.5. And so when you look at all the pictures of me before that age, I looked like a little girl. And then my sister was born, and miraculously, all there was a shift. My hair was cut, the clothes are all different. It's quite surprising. And then I lived in a household where there was relentless criticism on my gender, relentless criticism, always too feminine, always too fey. Although it was hard for me to tell the difference between what I was doing and what other people were doing. So I don't even think it was based on something I was doing. But it makes me extremely self-conscious about my presentation, which is so self-conscious in fact that the automatic internal experience of not even being able to come up with androgynous, right? That's the level of conditioning. But I think we all are conditioned in some way around this. I restrained my pinky drinking the coffee. How self-conscious are you? Which is a source of anxiety, right? And an inhibition to spontaneity, right? In all things, in dress and appearance, all of it. It's all there. How do we feel safe? The reason I'm harping away at this is because the way into safety is to be able to be spontaneously authentic and to be sensitive to consent in the relationship that you have with other people so that you match your presentation. That is to say, you match the level of intimacy which is in line with the consent for the intimacy that they're willing to receive from you. And you have that consent as well. Have you ever felt somebody pressuring you to reveal too much, more than you wanted to? So that we have each of those things, that sense of consent in giving and that consent in receiving. Insecure and disorganized people tend to rush into relationships and over reveal and then have these hangovers of a sense of vulnerability. And certain, aspects of preoccupied attachment like to elicit intimate experiences from other people so that they can trade them for intimate experiences from other people because they're in a sense of pretend mode and they don't value their own internal experience. They've never had the experience of their authentic experience being validated. They tend to trade on other people's intimate experiences. Is that making sense? Do you know what I mean? Did you hear what so and so did or said? The gossip component of things is really about trading on other people's intimacies because at the core of it, you don't feel that your authentic expression will hold the interest of someone else, level of anxiety. Right? I'm not interesting. Nobody's going to be interested in me, so I have to have some currency that I can use instead. But what happens when I run out of currency or they don't want to trade? I won't be wanted. Um, at the end of this is that sense of not being wanted, not being lovable, not being desirable. In that altar of the primary monogamous heterosexual relationship, what happens if none of that is what you want, right? But then have you also noticed when you confine yourself to monogamy and there's a sexual component to the relationship at the beginning when it's all new, it's quite interesting sexually, but then uh, sexual arousal is so often dependent on novelty that when you get to know somebody well enough, the the sexual desire begins to change. We might talk about this as the projection of love maturing. I tend to prefer to separate love from care, and that actually the thing that underpins relationships once you get past the say infatuation or the glow is the thing, of course, that drives you to pick somebody, right? But you don't know really anything about them except the meaning that you've given them in your infatuation. There isn't quite a universal beauty that everyone responds to. Have you ever been to France and gone into the post office? And every 10 years they change the statue of the ideal French woman, which is in the lobby of all of their post offices. And even that isn't that universal, right? It's a particular look. This is French. Have you ever been seen the billboards that describe something and say this is French? It's these reinforcements of culture over and over again. Where did you identify at what level? In the West, of course, most of us identify with ourselves as separate from everything. We don't even identify strongly with the family unit or the family system that we grow up in. In fact, it's easy to get estranged in a way, or to pull back, and particularly in insecure and disorganized family systems where never have you been rewarded for revealing yourself authentically, really. That all is this sort of flowing in a coherent way. If you're an infant and you express yourself to the world and the world responds in a way that's harsh, then we begin almost immediately to restrict our spontaneous expression, and we attune to the mind states of the caregiver, and we attempt to elicit from them the care that we need, but not in our terms, but in their terms. Is that making sense to you? To begin to understand how early this wiring happens, and how we can be set up to be in opposition to ourselves, which is also a deep sense of insecurity in the world. When you have a caregiver that's interested in you and observes you and pays attention to the things that you're drawn to and the way that you relate to things, and they reflect back you to you, what you begin to understand is, oh, this is me. And you begin to construct a working model of yourself that is you. I like this. I don't like this. This feels good. This doesn't feel good. I can make an expression and elicit care, and I can rely on that care coming based on my authentic expression. None of this, of course, is cognitive. This is all just being. But if your caregiver isn't capable of seeing you, isn't interested in you, isn't reflective of you back to you, but reflect back to you their experience of being with you. Do you get how subtle that difference is? Then what we take in is a reflection of someone else's idea of us rather than a feeling of us. And we begin to construct the working model of ourselves, which is based on their preferences about us rather than our preferences for ourselves. Is that making sense? And then in the life that we lead, having constructed a sense of what's appropriate for us to be, is this idea that's based in their experience, not in our own experience. And when our authentic desire arises, and it's in opposition to that, we're in conflict with ourselves about who to be and what to do and what to pursue. Is that making sense? And dependent on how dominant that other position was, we often collapse in on ourselves and are unable to manifest that authentic drive in life. What's the disadvantage of that? Mainly the disadvantage of that, and this is, I find, utterly heartbreaking, is that we find life painful. We find life meaningless. We can't find a direction to pursue that really enlivens us, because that critical structure of who we were told we were interferes so substantially with our own desire. Is that making sense? Well, I would say that at the very core is that lack of safety. And I think of it and I find it um, just heartbreaking that divine, curious, wonderful child that we all were was not celebrated. I mean, which is what should have happened, I like to say, or what might have happened had our caregivers been in better shape to take care of us. And then the sadness of that. Often, the sadness of that is of such intensity that we're frightened by it, and so we won't look at it. And often that fearfulness is that startled fearfulness of a child looking at something that the adults would have to manage, and we lose track of the fact that we have in fact become adults and we can actually manage it, right? We can manage that terrible sadness. We just have to stop turning away from it and just allow it to come through. And depending on how badly your caregivers parented you, although there may be quite a lot of it, but not impossible. And so we turn into that first level of fearfulness of expressing ourselves authentically. It's always that we're going to be abandoned. That abandonment fear is always followed by that terrible sadness of what do we do now? Of course, if you don't do that, what you end up doing is continuing the presentation of yourself that's in line with the somebody else's idea of who you should be, and that also produces a kind of sadness, not as profound, not as uh, shattering as that primal sadness, but that experience of this again, this I'm not interested in this. This isn't really doing it for me. I feel so empty, so lost in this. If you construct really capable, and a lot of us construct these really capable false selves that go out into the world and pursue things and get things done and grab up the tokens of late stage capitalism and stack them up on our shelves. And still that sense of feeling lost is there. That sense of brittleness is there. That fantasy. Whenever something real intrudes on that fantasy that we've constructed, we get brittle and defensive and mad. How can you be effortlessly, spontaneously yourself and at the same time manage the consent that you're giving and receiving? And so that the people that are drawn to you, of course, are drawn to that. If you present yourself inauthentically, they're drawn to that. Right? And then you're surrounded by people who don't think really see you, but they see who you tell them you are. None of us really passed high school telepathy. None of us can see past the facades because we're so good at constructing them. And if you have a splitting defense, like so many of us do, you split off all the parts of the other person you don't want to see anyway. And so you just are seeing these cultivated presentations over and over again. So you have that infatuation, right, that draws you to a particular person, but there's no rhyme or reason why that is, right? There's no experience of them yet. There's no uh, representation of how they'll be with you. And if there's a sexual component, of course, and if the sex is working, it's how hard it is to get sex to work between two people, and then it's working even a little bit. It's so intoxicating. You couldn't really call that a mature sense of a loving relationship, much of an mature sense of involvement. And often those relationships have difficulty moving into um, a longer term caring relationship if it's so intoxicating that it allows you to completely ignore the glaring red flags, the flashing red lights. uh, or the converse side of that, of course, is anhedonia, where you just shut the whole thing down. You don't feel anything in that way toward it. You get so disappointed in not being able to manage it. You just shut the whole thing down. Nobody lights you up. So what we need to do really is to begin to look at this idea of who we are and compare it to who we are. And what we need to understand is that if the ideas of who we are don't match so well, we need to just eject that structure of that early structure of who we are, which came from outside of us, and favor what actually is interesting to us, what's important to us. I like to call this the process of becoming who we are. In secure households, of course, you have a much better start at that. And in insecure households, it's restricted quite a bit. And in disorganized households, often it's massacred, that sense of who you were. And so there's different levels of things that need to happen in order to begin that process of blossoming. And there is also built into that a kind of sadness. If from the very beginning of your life you were encouraged to express yourself and you only had to construct your authentic self, you didn't have to construct an inauthentic self. And in addition, and you weren't in the situation where most of the resources went to construct the inauthentic self, and very little of the resources went to construct the authentic self. Sometimes you can drag over from the inauthentic self skill sets that you've developed and apply them to your authentic self. But often we find we're in the beginning of having to develop this authentic framework of who we are. And that puts us way behind the people that didn't have to do that. Just the sadness. And it can feel defeating in a way that we're never going to be able to catch up. But actually, we don't have to catch up to anyone except ourselves, right? In this process of becoming who we are. So whenever you begin this, of course, that what permeates that experience of developing and becoming who you are is the richness of the meaning of your life accompanying that. And so you can move out into this world of your own interest, of your own authentic being, and the reward is immediate, even if you can't complete a sentence in your conversation with someone else. Whereas if you slipped into the false self, you could hold the attention of the room. Is that making sense? And then, of course, as you build, it expands and expands and expands. It isn't going to catch you up particularly. But the solution to that is to understand you don't need to catch up. You're not competing, in a sense, for that. So the idea then is you let yourself in on yourself and you recognize that there's a strong conflict between the sense of who you're supposed to be and who you are, is that you begin to understand that that conflict is really originating in the early construction of who you need to be that came from the reflection of the caregiver, of their preference for you rather than who you were. That making sense? One of the things that also I think is useful to understand, and I really appreciate the Buddhist framing of that, is that there is no solid, consistent, constant self experience that arises. There is the self experience that arises spontaneously based on the conditions of the present moment. And so what you'll notice is that sense of self that you have is completely variable, depending on what the conditions are. And that's actually it, not the false self that has to be rigid and similarly responsive in each moment. To allow that. But we exist really in relationship to other people. Human beings are really poor at any kind of self-referential accuracy. Have you noticed that your mind can take you into these amazing places of being the best that there ever was? We even have a word for it, which is goat. Hilarious. And then at the same time, it can take you into the dumps of I'm the worst person that ever existed. Uh, I said to my friend Philip, Philip, you keep saying you're the worst person who's ever existed. Do you have any sense at all of how arrogant that is? And he came back later and he said, I thought about it and I think you're right. That to claim that I am the worst person in the world is quite arrogant. I'm the second worst person in the world. We associate with ourselves often this authentic experience of ourselves. We associate with being the wrong person or a terrible person or a bad person because it isn't what they wanted. Our authentic desire wasn't what they wanted. How do you get yourself out of bed in the morning? It's called desire. To do something, to go out and participate in the world, to relate to other people. If you can't be authentic, of course, you can't come out of the anxiety. You tell somebody who you are, and they take that in. And if they accept that's who you are, that's who they expect, right? But if that isn't who you are, you're always in anxiety that they're going to discover that that's not who you are. And then they're going to abandon you. You can't accept the evidence of them being with you as them not abandoning you because you haven't told them who you are. We begin this process of telling people who we are, and then people stick around. It's marvelous, right? It's astonishing sometimes. That thing that I've always had, that was always me, that I've always hidden because it was never wanted, you don't seem to mind that much. Or they say, no, 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 it's the opposite of it. I'm totally delighted by that aspect of who you are. That's why I'm here. That's the piece where you can just be effortlessly, authentically yourself without constantly self-censoring, self-excluding, self-rejecting in a way. You see somebody you might like, but you don't introduce yourself because you're confident that they'll reject you as soon as you do. So you just don't ever know whether they would or they wouldn't. Of course, that's the infatuation piece. You don't know. So you don't know who they are. You know how they appear to you, but you're using your definitions to define them at that moment. So then you say, oh, this looks like an interesting collection of stuff that means something to me, but let me go over and have a conversation and see who they actually are. And then you have that moment. We used to call it Vipassana romances on retreat. Do you know the term Vipassana romance? You go on retreat. It's a silent retreat, so you don't get to talk to anybody. You just get to watch them, and it's boring. You're sitting on a retreat. You're not doing anything 8 hours a day, and your mind is wandering and looking for entertainment. And then you begin to construct who this person is. We call it the Vipassana crush. And then after the second or third time of introducing yourself and watching that whole crystalline palace just come crashing down because they're nothing like who you are, uh, who you thought they were. I have a great story for that. It's a little bit off color, if you don't mind. I was sitting in a retreat, and in this particular retreat, there was all the people on the cushions were sitting in the middle, and all the people on the chairs were sitting across from each other. And so I was sitting across, and I noticed that there was a man sitting across who was looking at me, and he kept bumping his eyebrows up and going, "Yeah, yeah." And I was, "Oh, this is interesting." So it was a long retreat, like 15 days, and and I just thought, "Oh, this is serious crush material." I just let it flower over the course of the retreat. And then the bell rang at the end of the retreat, the silence, and he came rushing over to me. And I said, "This is going to be so interesting." And he said to me, "Did you see the tits on the woman who was sitting behind you?" Which was hilarious, but not what I was thinking. Now, here's the thing. I've told you all of this. I've told you what to do. All you have to do is be authentic, effortlessly, spontaneously authentic. Pay attention to the consent you have so that you're in the realm of consent. Uh, if you feel inhibited and you notice the inauthentic thing arising in the mind, you don't go for the inauthentic thing, you restrict the intimacy of your authentic expression. Right? A lot of us default to the inauthentic thing. We lie to smooth it over because we're afraid that if we don't lie, we'll be abandoned. Um, But what you notice in that moment, if you get to the place where the authentic expression arises in the mind and you have access to it, a lot of us get so beaten down, we don't even know what's authentic. It's a complete mystery what's authentic. So if you're at that stage, then you begin to pull up what the authentic response is. You make yourself sensitive to what the authentic response is, and then you allow it to open. And then if you have anxiety that expressing that is going to cause your abandonment, the inauthentic thing arises in the mind. And you push into the authentic thing and it immediately intensifies the abandonment here, right? So authentic expression, I'm afraid to be abandoned. That's the spike of abandonment here. Then the inauthentic thing, I could say, instead arises in the mind. If you pick that, of course, it immediately relieves you of the abandonment. And in that non-mentalizing, diluted state that we can easily get into, we think, "Oh, I'm preserving the relationship. I'm not threatening the relationship by not being authentic." But a little while later, you're really angry. And the anger is covering the fear that if they find out, they wouldn't stick with you anyway, that you can't rely on them because you don't know whether they would stick with you. And then you begin to pick at them, hector them. If you push into the abandonment terror, if you push into the authentic expression and it intensifies the abandonment terror and you can hold that, then this wave of terrible sadness comes crashing through. And that sadness is the recognition, if they stick around, if they stick by you, that that authentic expression could have been of use to you all the way along. And that it was actually you who were too frightened to present it, not that the world was unaccepting, the world was rejecting. And then when you ride out that terrible sadness, you come into this place of security, this place of not fearlessness in that sense. We're trying to pull the abandonment anxiety below the threshold of authentic expression. That's the way into safety. And it's each, unfortunately, episode, each entry in that perceptual database that has to be adjusted. There isn't a universal adjustment. It's each little thing that arising, that arising, that arising, each arising, that expectation of what will happen if I actually express this is there, built into it based on your experience of those kinds of presentations. And uh, as long as that fear is below the threshold of authentic expression, you can get it out. You can be who you are. You can become in each moment who you are. And if it sneaks up and it's too high, it's above the authentic expression, you'll roll into the inauthentic expression just as it's coming into consciousness, and you'll catch yourself in the inauthentic expression if you're paying attention, right? If you're mindful. And then you have the dilemma of, what do I do now? I've just lied. And the answer to that is you correct it as fast as you possibly can, because the longer you leave it, the harder it will be to correct. Oops. I misremembered that. Oops. That isn't what happened. Oops. Makes sense. I saw that there was a title of a book out called Everybody Lies, um, Big Data Analysis. Billions of entries, billions of lies that people have told just routinely. It's kind of built into the nature of creating spontaneously in the moment, the experience of reality, rather than relying on something that's fixed. It isn't fixed. In each moment, you create it. We don't. If you think about the way memory works, we remember what something means to us. We don't remember what happened, and we don't remember dialogue. For instance, we don't remember really what we said. We don't remember what the other person said. We remember what it meant to us, and then in the present moment, we recreate the dialogue based on what it meant to us, and based on the way that we understand people express themselves, right? So that if you're reviewing in your mind something that happened, you're making it up in the moment that you're reviewing it. You're not reviewing something that happened. That makes sense. So it's totally possible in a moment to make a self-conscious self that can't be literally accurate to the meaning that you made. It's not even that you're lying about what happened. You're lying about what it means to you. Oops. If you've told a story, this happened to me the other day. I told the story so many times, and I was actually telling the story to somebody who'd actually been there. They remembered it completely differently than I did, but I'd never had any resistance to the way that I told it. And so I really, I like to tell stories. And so I elaborated the language, let's say. They were thinking, wait a minute, that's not what I remember. Because they were talking about what they remember. You notice memories are really sort of self-oriented, what we did in the action and what it meant to us, rather than somebody else did. Can you be spontaneous and then recognize that that last moment of spontaneity may lacked in accuracy, and then in the next moment be spontaneous in correcting the accuracy and still keeping the abandonment terror below the threshold of authenticity? That would be the goal. And then you would be really free of that anxiety, because you could be in the place where you just expect people to uh, delight in who you are. How's that? A recipe. And yet here we are, right? We're all relational. We all operate in relationships in the way that we're conditioned to do that. That is to say, in the way that we've defined what relationships can be, what our expectations of relationships are. And we find over and over again, we simply identify from across the room the people that will relate to us in the way that we're understanding relationships to be, which are based on the early experience of being related to in our family system. How do we do it? We walk into a room of 200 people and walk right up to the person who's going to treat us the way our mothers did, or our fathers did, or our brothers or sisters. It's absolutely fantastic. The capacity. And we have this poor little self experience that has none of the capacity to do any of this, which is really the insight into the nature of the true self, this unconscious body mind activity of who you are that can do all of that, right? Can instantly identify in a room of 200 people by the way that they glow, who's the one who's about to deliver that model of care that we're so used to, that we expect, that we think we deserve. And so you have to pay attention to this. Now, what I would recommend we do is slow way, way, way down. Don't make up your mind about somebody for a year of relating to them, so that you actually can see them as a whole person. Pay attention to the parts that you split off that you're unwilling to look at, and engage and play with them. See if they're fun. See if they're enlivening. See if they help you take risks in things that actually matter to you, right? So that you're involved in your own life, and that they make that easier, not harder. They don't sap the resources that you would have used to explore. A lot of us who have trouble exploring like to burn up all of the energy that we might use for exploring and things that don't allow us to explore. There's lots of ways to do that. Relationships that are volatile and unstable that consume all of the energy. Restricting our gathering of resources so that we don't have enough to be able to pursue the things that we want. In the end, we want to feel safe to explore the things that matter to us, and we want to feel safe to explain the discoveries that we make to somebody who's interested in us. That's the thing. That's the thing we're trying to set up to try and make in the world. I guess the last step of all of this is, of course, it's fine if the things that matter to you, that have real meaning to you, are also valued in our culture. But it's completely possible that the things that really matter to you, that really have value for you, are not well valued in our culture, or even under assault in our culture, which I think is also pretty common, at least here now. Some sense of relief, some sense of progress, and then this pulling back. And then again, that's bringing this sense of safety back into yourself, that you feel confident, you feel safe in the pursuing of the things that matter to you, and that you don't look outside of yourself for these reassurances, these pats on the back. That you look for the pats on your back, the reassurance from the people that are actually engaged in you, in your life, that see you, that you've revealed yourself to, and have stuck around because they delight in who that is. And that this discovery that you make, one of the things that makes meaning, of course, is that when you translate your experience into a languaged expression that somebody else can understand, it deepens the sense of meaning and clarifies often for us the parts of it that are meaningful, because we have to find a way to express it so that it's accurately representing what we've discovered. And then their response to that also is meaningful. They often can hear in our descriptions of our discoveries and reflect back to us in a way that also enhances and deepens our understanding of the thing that we've discovered. That if you're afraid to express what it is that matters to you and what it is that you're discovering about life, of course, you miss the opportunity of that being reflected back to you in a way that deepens your understanding. That making sense? It doesn't help to give somebody a polished version that's been modified, because then the reflection that comes back to you is also of less value, less use. How is that? Good description. Jules.
Hi. Um, Good to see you, George.
Good to see you too.
Um, so I have this experience sometimes of being triggered back into insecure attachment,
Mm-hmm.
and the intensity varies. You know, it could be something small, and I'm able to say whatever is in my mind I think is happening, it's not happening, and I'll
Right.
just say, well, that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is I'm sitting in my car and I'm driving.
Right.
And that just passes by and it's no big deal. Sometimes when it happens and it's a larger event, I can sit with the feelings and just do like a noting feeling states, or just sitting with the feeling and watch it unwind
Yeah.
without story. And then sometimes I'm triggered enough that I recognize, like, I'm mentally, something happens in the present moment, and then I'm mentally referring back to childhood and the
Mm-hmm.
insecure attachment and that story. And since I've been doing the IP work and the attachment repair, I wondered if going back into that insecure mind state is actually like re-traumatizing.
I wouldn't say necessarily re-traumatizing. The thing that happened in the present moment sometimes can be re-traumatizing, but the thought processes I wouldn't say would be. What's happening is in that moment, you've identified and assigned the meaning to the thing that's happening based on conditioning.
Mm-hmm,
And that memory thread that goes all the way back into childhood is how you've identified the present moment. And then the mind is simply going to play all of that
mm-hmm,
information that's in that memory thread. And so if you really pay attention to the mind, it's just going to, one episode after another is going to flash through the mind. Maybe you get caught up on one particular memory, and then that becomes a repeating process. So what you've remembered is the self-generated emotional
mm-hmm,
strategy
mm-hmm,
for regulating that kind of experience, and all of a sudden that's generating the internal experience that is then matching the outside. Um, and then you get locked into that sense of self.
mm-hmm.
Um, the Shinzen, used to talk about this as the cultivated garden of the limited identity and the jungle of the, that whole unconscious
Mm-hmm.
beingness, and that the curated sense of self is surrounded by a wall, and there's a gate in the wall, and as long as the gate is open and you can go effortlessly in and out,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a problem. But sometimes the gate slams shut and the lock is jammed. And then you're at the gate rattling it, trying to get out of the limited identity, which is a painful place, and the gate won't open to let you slip into a different identity. And then really the idea is to recognize that I'm trapped in the self experience.
Mm-hmm.
and to see if you can find a way out of that.
Okay. So not necessarily in those moments utilizing IPF to
Yeah, if you have
re
access, why not?
yeah.
Have
Okay.
them break down the door and drag you out of there.
Okay, good.
If you haven't done ideal parent figure protocol, ideal parents are these ideas of ideal caregivers, but they have infinite power, so that if you were trapped somewhere, they could easily knock down the wall and grab you and take you out of there. It's part of the process of visualizing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It happens to me very infrequently now, but it still does happen.
Mhm.
The it's and it the underlying feeling is, for me, is mostly fear of something.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions? What do you say we do a little practice? Ideal parent figure, uh, insight, or vipassana? It's always the case in democracy. Most people don't vote. Then we have to put up with the fascists. All right, let's do some ideal parent figure. Go ahead and settle in, finding your way out of there. I'll count from 5 to 1. When I reach 1, you'll be fully present, fully awake. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fully awake, settled in the experience. How's that? Good. Good to see you. I welcome your practice. I offer the teaching freely. But I do hope that if you're resourced and can make a donation, you will. I put the link into the chat. Any amount is helpful. It helps supports me and also the work the Mettagroup is doing. And if you're not resourced, you're totally welcome. I hope to see you soon somewhere along the way. Bye.